Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here again on Tartlecast. Mac had originally joined us, and we really enjoyed the episode. It actually took off pretty well online, considering people are like logistics. What the hell are we going to talk about when it comes to logistics, right? Sounds like a nosebleed. Well, actually, it's one of the most important things, and it's one of the oldest, what I would say, merchant services that have really happened on this planet since the onset of any major economy or civilization that was occurring. Even in a historical fact, right? Let's consider the fact of Alexandria in Egypt. After that port was truly established, right? We're talking about massive amounts of trade that were happening across the Mediterranean. This was like, and it's only, they weren't in any sort of industrial revolution, right? They just had very simple boats. You're throwing your pottery on there, and you're trying to get across the Mediterranean without getting killed to deliver your product. Now, things have developed a lot since then. We have massive 20,000 TEU ships, right, that are carrying products back and forth for an absolutely enormous globalized economy. And when there are any sort of shifts or changes to this, what I would say, frankly, sensitive system, if you are not ahead of the game in something that is so heavily commoditized, you're going to find yourself obsolete. Is that right? Am I close to that? So I want to defer to you guys on this. So if we're thinking about logistics service providers, how is it that they look to survive in the fourth industrial revolution with the onset of things that have happened from blocking of the Suez Canal, for the change of workforces, right? The lack of actual human bodies to come in and do work. And then on top of that, the catalyst that occurred from the U.S.-China trade war. So where should we sort of start with this to kind of frame out this picture for individuals that are listening to it and understand how that this industry, one of the oldest industries, is actually lagging behind on technological adaptation that could truly help it thrive when it really needs it, especially when it's squeezed on pricing. So whoever wants to go first, please jump in.
Ruben, kick it to you, man.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Maybe I just start. Maybe we simplify a bit first. I have a friend who always had a good explanation of what we do for the 6 and 7 years old out there. He said we just move stuff from A to B. Okay, I mean that's what shipping and logistics is about. So, and it has been done the same. It has been done for a very long time. So now we face a lot of challenges, and of course we're suddenly a very sexy industry and become a bit mainstream media, which is great. But actually, we still do pretty much the same thing. So, of course, technology is a bit behind, and that's also what we were focusing a bit on in our book. Huh? I mean,
yeah. But Ruben, let's think about something here. So not only for the Fortune 1000 CEOs that listen to this podcast, but also the layman across the globe, when people get something that comes from Amazon, right, or some sort of product, and it says, "Oh, this came from the United States, came from Indonesia, came from Australia. Where have you?" They don't really know how it got there. They don't know everything that's involved. How many touch points have to occur? How many different parties come together to actually move one potato, right, from one geography to the next? And mind you, you have to deal that with weather, and people don't even know that there are traffic systems in the ocean. All those things have to occur. So where is it within this industry, in this simplicity, right? When you say it's moving objects from point A to point B, yeah, that sounds all well and good. But what is the actual reality of how that movement works before we can get into how you technologically create a revolution within that? So can you frame it out for individuals at this moment, how we move any product right now? What's the process, the workflow from point A to point B?
Of course, it's the whole value chain is very complex. Huh? You also may not forget that there is not only the product moving. I mean, the product consists of parts and consists of raw materials. Okay, first of all, there are raw materials moving somewhere, then they're getting processed, then there's some further processing. I mean, if you look at your usual T-shirt, for example, I mean, there's cotton moving maybe from Uzbekistan via Iran to China. It is getting spun there. It is becoming fabric there. It's being shipped to Bangladesh. It's being turned into fabric there. It's being turned into your T-shirt at some stage, and it ends up in the US. So it has probably moved in 5-6 different journeys before it even arrives on the US continent. Huh? So it's very different in the sense that things are moving and how complex these are, and they involve a lot of parties along the way, of course, as well.
So
If
you
I
have,
could,
go ahead, jump in, please, by all means, shut me
Please,
up.
yeah.
I often approach, because I work in the technology space for supply chain logistics and helping companies, determine which technology they should use and how it should be used, et cetera. And I think it's really important to kind of really identify what you mentioned earlier, in that it is a ripe industry for technology innovation. So there
Yeah.
are a lot of startups in the space right now, but if you really think about, and I'm just thinking from like a consumer perspective, I have a phone that can allow me to talk to anybody in the entire world whenever I want. Right now, we are all sitting on a stream. We are all in different places. Like, you would think that that is just how business works. But all of those pieces that Ruben just mentioned, all the different parties, it's still very much in the logistics industry, like people making phone calls
Yep.
and sending emails, like phone calls from landlines and sending emails and printing PDFs and scanning PDFs and sending PDFs and then manually writing down what's in the PDF. So when my husband is like, "Oh, I don't understand why I can't get this, my Nintendo, whatever," like, people are working again. And like, yeah, but people weren't working for months and months and months and months. So think about all of those already slow manual processes that basically stopped.
Okay.
So they didn't stop, and then now I have a super cool iPhone or smartphone that's going to send everything. They stopped and then started again with people making phone calls from their landline and sending an email and like hoping that I told you the right information in enough time for you to, like you mentioned, get ahead of it. How do you get ahead of it when your data and your information is always behind? You can't. So it's definitely important to realize that we're still very manual.
Okay, so then if I'm trying to think about this in the most reasonable format possible, we are trying to move stuff around. It has 5 to 6 touch points on a completely open system. This is not a closed system. There is so much waste that is actually occurring. And we can have all the technology in the world for the majority of it, but you still have such a strong human element within logistics and supply chain that really needs to have a focus first. Before I can even implement new technologies, you also have to train people on the technologies.
100%.
You have to understand the workflows to institute that, which is conversations with them and understanding their business inside and out. So it's like, how is it when we try to do this reasonably in some sort of consultative, reasonable, agile development, understanding these processes and workflows and understanding the people? Is this the typical mapping process that we go through before we even look to the fourth industrial revolution and the technology that, can really help once we have everything else settled in place? Do we still have to do sort of those older refinement of processes and reducing those friction points to get there?
I mean, on the first point, there's many more touch points than you mentioned. I mean, you just said there's 5. I've seen funny graphs where there's 152 on one shipment. Okay, which in the end, where actually a shipment is moving through, and where there is a gate in, where there is a gate out, where there's this, where there's that. So there is a large part of touch points, and as it was already said, we have this kind of communication. Of course, it might be landlines. Maybe let's say we're a bit more advanced and it's chatting and it's whatever. But it's a lot of knowledge that is being shared and communicated, and a lot of that is moving between the heads of human beings, of course. And it's still in there. Of course, part of it is in systems, but most of it is still in the head of people. Experience plays a role, of course. I think we will still talk about data because that's more your field than ours, and
Right.
I'm a bit intrigued on what can happen in that. But it's a lot of complexity that, of course, I agree with you, that you need to take out first. So you need to simplify before you can think about automation and digitalization.
Yeah, and that's clear. And if I understand, with these paper processes, just merging the document, it's not like you need crazy new technologies to take 2 PDFs and put them together and create a single file. What
It's
you got to do is,
yeah, a lot of the technology is already there. But you mentioned
the technologies are there since 20 years. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not the issue.
Yeah.
That's not the
it
issue.
more or less hasn't been implemented.
Right. And so if we look at human beings, they are walking silos. And so unless we have a good way to capture what's going on in their mind and what they've learned over the years and put that into some sort of data, which we can find that insight and then come back to that business and say, we've understood this from everyone in here, all of your talent, right? All of this human capital. And these are where we are seeing the most pain points for us in terms of us lagging in doing these workflows. So before we even invest in something that could be complex and expensive, it's like you can't make a dog with 2 legs run any faster, right? With some sort of new technology. It's got 2 legs. You got to give it 4 legs first before the thing really takes off. So
if you take your bad old processes and put them in technology, you're maybe
correct.
just going to do your bad processes faster than what you were doing before.
Absolutely, or not even. You're just gonna mess them up entirely.
Yeah.
Right. So
you have to know your processes, right?
So you have to know the processing. Mac, explain that. So if we're going to take an introspective look, like you guys have done at your own firm, how is it that we get to know our own processes so that you could even share that as an example for other logistics providers?
Yeah, I'm excited. I think Michael just joined us as well.
Michael, thank you.
This goes back to that concept of digitalization, right? So instead of having a paper-based PO where that goes from one manager to another, and then, for us in our having a centralized means to capture that, right? When we started putting POs into the system, we started noticing in mid 2020 a steep rise in POs for desktop printers. And we saw, okay, so what are these people? Why do we need so many more desktop printers? So the people were working from home and they needed their printers to print the documents,
right,
and physically pull them apart and then scan them back in to merge the files, right? So by digitally capturing that PO and seeing that data point, right, we then realized nobody had been taught how to merge and split documents in Adobe Acrobat, right?
I do love how creative people are, though. They're like, I know exactly what to do. I'm going to buy me a printer. I'm going to do it manually, and then I'm going to scan it in. I know I can scan things.
And so, I read an interesting article on CNN yesterday. Hey, toy manufacturers are now looking to see how they can get smaller items into their containers, right? So the container has a fixed amount of space, right? Mm-hmm. So they're saying, I don't want to sell the Tonka trucks because they're big and their retail price is $14 and my margin is, I'm making this up, $4, right? Versus something smaller like a USB, maybe I can sell for $20 and my margin is $10, right? So the light bulbs are clicking. Oh, we have a fixed amount of space and we have to maximize, the use of that space, right? And I'll take that one step further. Prior to 2020, the concept of a digital twin supply chain optimization suite wasn't on the non-Fortune 500 supply chain team's radar for probably the next decade, right? Yeah. Recently, I saw Google just roll out theirs. And once again, going back to your initial point, it was the catalyst of these dominoes that happened, right? The U.S.-China trade war. Okay, people woke up and said, hey, I don't know my duty rates for this HS code, right? So they started looking at that and they started to kind of say, okay, if duty rates change by 25 or 40%, how is that going to affect my landed costs? So that was the first one, right? Then you had COVID-19 hit, right? How can we be more agile, right? China's completely locked down. We can't get our factories up and cranking. However, Turkey's still open. Indonesia's still open. We want to shift manufacturing there. How does my landed cost then adjust to those manufacturing origin shifts, right? So that's sourcing, compliance are now involved.
Yep.
Then you have the Evergreen ship get stuck in the Suez Canal. Once again, that's where we as logisticians come into play because, hey, how can I reroute my cargo? On my phone, on my Google Maps or on my Apple Maps, I can say, hey, let me see the different routes. And I can almost retrospectively go and pick a different route. Logistics, right? So we're seeing all these events kind of wake up our customers to say they need more control of their supply chain. They need it digitalized and available in a form that they can kind of optimize and run different scenarios. Once again, from a monetary perspective, from a risk perspective. And
But I mean, this is just a point. You have things that when something is always cheap and always available, nobody cares. It's just
Correct.
there. And now suddenly, of course, it becomes a factor. Okay, and people have to think smart in order to optimize. And I think I find that always a very interesting anecdote. If you look now at this whole CO2 discussion and so on, if things have a price suddenly, and if things suddenly become a bit rarer, you have to be smarter about it, right?
Right. You know, guys, we don't need to even be naive about it. You have an increase in the human population, a higher demand for physical goods. Ships can only be built so quickly, and they can only hold so much space. And a canal takes one ship at a time. It's engineered to be a bottleneck, right? So if we're looking at this sort of planning in a business that is so highly commoditized, and you want to push it into the fourth industrial revolution, which is extremely data driven, to go back, do regressive analysis and say, this is probably a more appropriate route, probably more appropriate timing. Maybe we should shift the ports we're coming in and out of to kind of save on costs. How is it that we reasonably get to that point? How is it that you get these companies to spend money when they don't have money to spend? Do you go to the bank and say, listen, I'm going to mortgage my ship and my cargo so that I can bring this money in and, buy this new software and also train these individuals to do so? It's very uncomfortable to get that sort of change in place for very entrenched systems, for people that, frankly, this is how we've been doing it for a very long time. So it's like, why should I do it any other way? And we know that these catalysts of events are only going to, increase in frequency. So how do we get ahead of that?
I was actually going to say exactly something related to what you just said, in that
you're telepathic. That's why.
This
we just solve logistics and supply chain. Everyone's
talking about an industry where it is very much, this is what we've been doing for 20 years.
Right.
Like, why do we need to change? So it's not that, I have found, at least in working with my clients, if you can communicate the value, the money is found. So if you are talking to someone who understands the value of the investment in this technology, the value of the investment in truly mapping out your network and understanding where the risks are, where is the weak link, it takes a lot of time to do that, especially when we've got this tribal knowledge, people that have been at the company forever. One of the first things we do when we go into something is say, okay, you're doing this, but why? And 90% of the time they say, because that's what they told me to do when I started. No one knows what happens with the information downstream or upstream. Like, no one knows what happens. So if you really take the time to figure out how can we improve this as the process, and then what data do we need, what technologies do we need, and what human capital do we need? So a lot of that is, quite frankly, I think just bringing in new blood, people who have not been in the industry for forever. But also, I would say I made a career change into supply chain and logistics. It was never a sexy industry. It was never something where people were like recruiting for it and telling me how fun it could be and how important it is to the world to keep everything moving. I think that with COVID and with everything being out there now and supply chains being this big thing, we will start to see more new blood become interested. And as they start to get into more decision-making positions, we will start to see this investment because they understand the value. I think a lot of it is just trying to change these mindsets of, this is what's comfortable for me. This is what I've always done. We've always had problems and we've always figured it out. So what's different now?
There are companies.
And the pressure helps, huh? I mean, the pressure of the current situation really helps. I mean, in China, we always say, if there is no pressure, there is no motivation. And I mean, that is what certainly accelerated a lot of stuff. I mean, over the last year and a half or 2 years. Huh?
You talked about sexiness of logistics. There's some companies out there.
Yeah, are you kidding me?
There's some companies out there who've realized in the meantime that also logistics can be a competitive advantage. And I think this will also change in the future. I saw this with Huawei. I did a bit of business with Huawei supply chain management. It's amazing. So for them, supply chain management is competitive advantage. Because they link the supply chain up to the final customer and they provide full transparency. They do risk
Yeah,
analysis, they work in scenarios and so on. So I guess this will be a bit of a change also triggered now by COVID and all the other happenings of the past couple of years.
and that's really interesting, because whether you think about, Huawei, they're a technology company, and you're looking at cell phones, and the fact that they have to track when the lithium is getting mined in Argentina or Africa, or wherever it's coming from, all the way to the battery manufacturing, and then making sure that the silicon wafer chips, any sort of microprocessing units, they all come together. And then you have the larger bag of items, which is essentially like the phone itself. Fantastic. Now I know, in the full map of things that is going on, where each of these items comes from. And when you have that sort of mapping, that traceability that is occurring, you have the touch points with the data. But what we've missed a lot in the rest of the supply chain industry, it's all well and good that we can track where our cell phone came from, right? Or we can see that our cotton was ethically sourced. But there are still a monumental amount of individuals, human elements that come into place that are completely uncaptured in that process. Most of the processes that are captured come from a third-party observation, which means some sort of system is going through and just capturing the data as that is actually moving. But what doesn't get captured with data, which is missed, is always the human element. So when we look to things like the fourth industrial revolution, it's fantastic that we're throwing, bigger engines on the boats. They're going to be wider. We're going to have more data to capture it. Maybe the efficiency on these engines, save on the diesel costs, how quickly we have it in port, all well and good. There's still a human being operating the crane. We still have a guy driving the boat, driving the truck. There's still going to be accidents on highways. We still have perspectives in the offices for even the culture. If people are unhappy at the work and you don't capture the data of people's emotional states, that in the total system of logistics and supply chain could slow down a truck getting to a client's front door. If somebody's having a bad day and it doesn't end up at the dock, that 40%, landing fee you incurred is now up around 60% because you have such a delay. And then every truck after that, you're trying to catch back up to that point. So when I look at this, and if I understand the focus that you guys have on it, is when we look to the fourth industrial revolution and all these catalysts are in place, it's all well and good for advancing technology for technology's sake, but we have to focus on figuring out how to advance the human beings. And it's very difficult.
Or how to maybe...
Go ahead.
Or how to maybe even automate a few things. I mean, maybe we have to, let's even take the physical aspect out and the whole blue collar aspect out, because what we focused on at the beginning was also more the whole white collar labor aspect inside logistics and supply chain. And if we look at that, I mean, you always have this typical cycle. You have data, you have analysis, you have decision, and then you have action.
Yep.
And in our business, between each of these segments, there is a human element. Okay, there is a decision that needs to be made. There is somebody looking at the analysis and so on, and there is very little automation of that cycle. Okay, in quite a lot of the aspects in our industry, where actually the data should automatically be analyzed, should automatically suggest actions, decisions should automatically introduce action. Because even in exception management, you don't need to have a human element in each piece of the chain, and we have that in a lot of cycles within one supply chain.
Yeah, and so if you can automate that route work, that actually reduces the cognitive load on that human capital that you have, and allows them
more strategic decision making.
Yes, precisely.
They can be more creative in the solutions. Because I don't remember if it was Ruben or Mac who said it, but if I now have to, I see that Evergreen is blocking the Suez Canal. In my brain, I have to come up with, maybe there is an automated, hey, these are your options. But then as the human, I have to synthesize that data, think critically, and make a decision. If I'm not doing these just like repetitive manual tasks, then my cognitive load is now free to make these critical thinking, synthesizing decisions, because it's not weighed down by type in this number in Excel from the PDF.
Correct.
Yeah, but that's exactly, I mean, this is at the moment also one of the focuses which might be too much. I mean, there's a lot of focus on visibility at the moment, okay? So now I have great visibility. I have my 35 containers that sit on that ship in the Suez Canal, but it doesn't solve my problem. Okay, so I get attention and I get 35 alerts and it's red pinging in my mailbox, but it doesn't solve my problem. So how do we get from this data to really do something with it and to really make a decision? And now it's still human beings then starting to shuffle around. Okay, what options do we have? What can we do? When it opens again, we can unload the cargo maybe at an earlier port. We can try to truck it from there to final destination, save 2-3 days or whatever, things like that. Okay, but that's all back down to exception management handled by humans and not really proactively solving the case.
Correct. At the and Max, I know he's about to jump into this, but at the end of the day, all the data that's captured, all it can do is suggest. It can only suggest the action for us to take. So we would hope
provide actionable insights for humans to make actions.
That's correct. And if that human is distracted doing rote work that should otherwise be automated, you're never going to feel the gains of the fourth industrial revolution until you actually encompass the human element that needs to be there. And people just think, if I invest the cash, I don't really have to focus on, things just fix themselves. They don't. It's a massive error that a lot of C-suite executives will make. They'll be like, oh, let's just put money into it. It'll fix itself. Let's buy this technology and wrap it into our ERP systems. And nothing's actually changing. They've made it more confusing and it's now more ineffective. And what you still find is that people are still doing the same old processes because they don't want to take the time to learn the new technologies anyway. They said, this just works better for me. Go ahead, Mac.
For me, I don't think they feel empowered, right?
Yeah, here we go.
I think I showed you this last time, right? So over here is Malcolm McLean, right? And Malcolm McLean, he was a truck driver. And he sat at the port and said, why am I waiting 10 hours for this cargo to get unloaded off the ship, right? And so he was the father of the intermodal container.
Yep.
This, right? And it basically boosted globalization to what we know today, and we're still stuck in it. Right? I mean, it epitomizes the state that we're in, that this massive ship is sitting in the middle of that canal, and everybody's like, oh, technology is going to solve it. No, it takes somebody to say, offload the freaking containers and blow up the ship and let's get the cargo moving.
Yeah,
it takes somebody feeling empowered to make those decisions, right? So in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, Klaus Schwab made it really interesting observation and emphasis on fixing problems for the greater good. I mean, if you read his work, it's not just how, labor is going to get disrupted by these technologies. It's how can we, as a global community, utilize these technologies to solve real world problems?
Correct.
So that goes back to what, so you said a third party needs to observe the events that's happening. And that's where, I work for a freight forwarder, and we're an interesting observer, as we're like a travel agent for freight, although I know Ruben hates that analogy. we see a lot of things that happen that maybe sometimes our customers don't even, right? So you go to most of our customers, they don't even know their second tier suppliers. And sometimes they don't even know their actual first tier suppliers. They don't have a list in one place to say, hey, here's my 27 suppliers outside of, Albuquerque, New Mexico, unless they're the companies that can hire a very sophisticated supply chain optimization company and do heat maps. I was looking at this book because what they teach in schools is, doing warehouse optimization for Walmart. I mean, how many supply chain students get to come out of school and then go do supply chain optimization for Walmart? I mean, it's like 0.00001%, right? I just want to make one last point, Alex, and I'll turn it back to you. It was interesting when I started in this industry 10 years ago, in that I loved, people see me and they're like, oh, you have a lot of energy. You're always asking questions. And I was like, yeah. And I've managed to hold on to that in this industry. But I think these guys can attest to it. That's fairly rare, right? This industry grounds out the curiosity out of a lot of people. And they're just like, tell me what to do. Push this paper, check this box. And that's their job in a large majority of the cases. Our customers aren't like, hey, here's all of our supplier information. Come, optimize my supply chain. The people we talk to, they don't even have the ability to do that. The logistics managers at these big companies, that's done at either a high level or it's done, through pressure, I think, to Ruben's point.
Yeah, but I mean, this is maybe where we have to take a different role. I mean, we have to change from being this kind of observer as a freight forwarder or logistician or whatever you want to call us to become more the kind of a consultant that the customer needs, okay? To actually throw his data back at him, okay? You made the customs clearance of his last 3 shipments from 3 different suppliers. You know how long it takes the supplier A until he gets the cargo finally loaded that actually was already paid for. You know what the landed costs are. You have that information. And we just need to be more than just transporters of cargo from A to B. And I always see this in our industry also as an opportunity. We can do a lot more. And to what Mac said about the people and the mindset, that's very true. We have still this kind of, we do things like we used to do them, instead of actually questioning. I mean, if you look at our industry, we get a lot of young people into it all the time, okay? And then we train them how it is supposed to be done, okay? This is the process, A, B, C, D, E, okay? And we don't ask these digital natives, hey, this is the challenge, how would you do it? You know, we don't have this kind of an innovative approach to this industry. So as we said earlier, one of the things here is really that a lot of the technology that we use here is around since 20 plus years, okay?
Yep.
I mean, doing an online booking, handling a shipment digitally from A to B is possible since 20 plus years. It hasn't happened. It hasn't really taken off because people have not adapted to what the technology actually enables. Huh?
Well, that's
I don't think that companies are doing a good job of answering what's in it for me. Because from my experience of being on the side of implementing technologies and trying to do what Ruben just said, let's take a consultative approach, because very often the client comes in and says, okay, this is my process that I do in Excel. Can you just fix it? And, or not fix it, but just throw it in, lift and shift, throw it into your technology. And very often they don't want to hear, why would I do, like, why are you doing that? Why does this step need to go into the tool? And it comes off, I think, to them as like, oh, you're questioning, my authority, or you're questioning my knowledge. And it's more so, I want to understand why the technology and how it could be configured to do this piece of it. And then how are your users now going to interact with it? And what happens up here when you're not the person that's actually interacting with the technology, it's a gross underestimation of the time and the energy that it takes to embrace this new process and get all of the stakeholders on the same page, and to make sure that everyone understands what happens. But most importantly, why should I start doing this? Why is it important for me? And a lot of what I've seen at like the senior level up to exec level is just, they should just know, like, obviously it's better, how Ruben mentioned, like Coke is doing it, Apple's doing it, Walmart is doing it. So if they're doing it, then like, obviously everyone should get on board, but no one's really taking the time to say, okay, it's really going to take people 3 to 4 months to be okay with letting go of what they have been doing for the last 10 years. Then it's going to take people really another 6 to 9 months to truly master this next piece of it. So we're at a year, and people are like, oh no, 10 weeks. I've heard my most recent, like, I'm going to laugh to keep from crying estimate was a 10-week ERP implementation for $500,000 for a $200 million company. Like, there's no way. You have 50 people that need to buy into this. There's no way it's going to cost $500,000. And there's no way that you're going to do it in 10 weeks. How? In what world? In what world does that make sense?
Look, all we have to do is look to the data of the past. When's the last time a culture changed overnight? It didn't. Exactly. The only time cultures disappear is when the civilization burns to the ground, right? And then we're, digging through the dirt to find out what they were possibly doing. But for most of us, we are just going about our processes with our constant daily habits. What we do at home, we typically actually end up bringing into work. That carries through in there. It's very difficult to incentivize people to do anything. People want to clock in, clock out, get the paycheck, leave. And you're saying, hey, to these C-suites, I know it's all well and good that you want to implement all these things, and you think that there's going to be a cost savings, fourth industrial revolution, all this technology. But in reality, You don't know the individuals within the culture of your own workplace. You don't understand how catalysts affect them personally, because when they're doing a job, everything's personal. And if they've been doing it for 10 plus years, if you go to touch or even tiptoe into that process, there's a lot of ego baked into that. And not in a bad way. People are proud of what they do, even if it's moving paper from here to there. And so if you want to go about these processes properly, if you want to really maximize on data, fourth industrial revolution, all of these technologies, which have essentially been around for a while, but capture it, it's going to require conversations with the stakeholders that are within these individual enterprises, within these processes itself. And unless you take the time, that consultative approach, whether it's in-house consultation or hiring an expert from the outside, to come in and say, what is the narrative for each of you? And then stitch that narrative together to really see where the friction, the pain points are, and make something truly efficient. If that doesn't happen, you will dump money. You will bleed it every single day into new technologies, new sales processes, whatever it might be that you think will solve it, but it won't, because there's a human being.
It also has to do with the vision you give the people. I mean, the point is, what is their role afterwards? Okay, you have to be clear on where things are heading. Okay, and for me, take sales for example. Okay, I mean, a lot of people I talk to, they always consider quotation sales. Okay, when I started in this industry some 23 years ago, I made 10 quotes a day by fax machine, and I was busy. Okay, that was my job. Okay, today you probably make 50 by email, supported by a system or whatever. But quotation is not sales. Relationship management, relating to your customer, understanding their needs, telling them how to solve their problems better, and so on. That's consulting. That's almost consulting, and that's what actually sales is. Okay, price is online. You can get it here anytime by API or whatever means, and it's there for you. And if you have an issue with it, and if it's not competitive, you come to me. Okay, but daily quotations is of absolutely no use. So if you take your salespeople and embrace them and say, hey guys, quotation is not sales. You are managing the relation on behalf of the company, then you're also upgrading them and you have a totally different dialogue. But if you tell them, hey, we have to get away with quotations and the bot is going to do that tomorrow, then you just lose everybody. And that's not what it's about. And I think we come back to the pressure point also that the industry faces at this very moment, is that everybody is at the edge. Okay, we're now in 18 months of supply chain hell. If you look at the beautiful headlines in the newspapers nowadays, the people are stressed out. Okay, they are at their limit, and they would actually be happy to give part of that away. Okay, things that don't add value, my God, take it off my back. Huh? So it's also an opportunity in that sense, which accelerates this fourth industrial revolution in our part. And if we come back to Schwab's book, Mac, then it's very simple. He mentions very clearly that the key problem in the technology side is the human being that's in between, okay, that doesn't implement or that doesn't change or that we have to convince the way around. And I think in the consulting work of Dyci and everybody is, and of Michael as well, it's the same thing every day. It's about people. Tech is easy. Implementation with people, with human beings, that's the hard part.
Well, it's hard to empower someone just to speak up. Some people are always worried, like, shit, if I say anything, I mean, he or she, my boss, the head honcho, El Jefe, is going to hold this against me for I don't know how long. And then they're just going to, it's story time in their head, right? And they're just going to just wallow, and it's just going to become worse. And then efficiency just goes through the floor. How do you make those people feel comfortable?
So the first thing you can do, Alex, is, we've been doing a lot of like personality tests and team leadership training. And one of the first things we need to do is recognize our introverts and our extroverts, right? Because if you let the extroverts sit here and talk the whole time, maybe the introverts or the more risk averse people aren't going to say anything. So with that note, Michael, I don't know you as an introvert. I was going to let you comment though before I hop in as the overbearing extrovert.
Oh, good. No, I was like chipping in a bit later today, sorry for that. So it's just like finding my way into the conversation. Highly engaged conversation, as I see
it. So I do have a comment though. It's what I hear from you, Alex, and some and more from Dyci is the need for the Gemba walk, right? To have the C-suite and the managers out there walking the floor. Now, that's harder to do during COVID, right, as we're not having as many in-person meetings. And I love the conversation about, is quotation in the sales domain, right? So what we've been doing here at NR is we've been trying to use the concept that Microsoft rolled out called domain-driven design, right? And putting things like address book and billing and quotation on a table with our 8 different domains and saying, where does it go? Where does it fit in, right? Because then we can hold those domain leaders accountable for the different functions within their domains.
So
yeah. But the reality is that there's no common data model in logistics, right? That quotation means different things to different companies, and once again, it's a very diverse sector, right? Shipping a large ISO container full of orange juice is very different than shipping a $2 million piece of semiconductor machinery, right? They're drastically different pieces that are involved, and that brings in some of the complexity. But it's a fine balance between abstracting away those details, like what's inside the box, to try to find the common process flows, and just getting stuff done, right? Because at the end of the day, it's doing the Gimbal walk. And Ruben was talking about customers. What we did last week was actually we sat down with some of our second tier trucking providers, right? The second party logistics companies that maybe they own the fleet of trucks or maybe they don't, and said, hey, our customers want better visibility, and right now you're the weakest link, right? How can you get me that POD, that proof of delivery, faster? And he's like, well, if you can help me get the POD faster for my drivers, it's a win-win for both of us, because he's struggling the same way as we are. We're trying to get it from him, and he's trying to get it from drivers.
Well, so Mac, let's be honest. I've driven across the United States an unfathomable amount of times than any normal human being should do. That's not a truck driver. Have you seen the pace at which the truck drivers move once they get out to get a meal? You're filling up your 150-gallon diesel tank. Oh, wait, I forgot the DEF. Oh, by the way, we don't have electronic logs. Oh, hold up. Like the Suez Canal, we got to block up because, I'm moving in. I'm trying to get this freight through New Mexico, but I got to get pulled off here because, they got to check, make sure everything's in here. There's not the human trafficking element that's coming into it. It's like, that is not the focus. The focus for the truck driver is the more miles I put on those tires, the more dollars I get. They're not really caring so much about the fact that the delivery gets to the door. They don't care about the end product. They just know, I got my sleeper cab. I want to be comfortable. This is how I make my living, and things happen throughout the day. So how do you get people like that, even in the second tier part of the logistics, to care about the product at the end of the gate, to get the logs quicker so that somebody else down the line is going to find the benefit from it when they don't see the benefit right here for them and now?
So what we're trying to do is drive a pragmatic digital transformation. Everything should be driven by pragmatic, human-driven problems. And once again, it's not just focused always on our external customers, it's focused on our internal customers. And how can we reduce the friction for them to do the simple tasks that are clogging up the supply chains? And we don't need any sophisticated digital twin to tell us that, right? It's, hey, it takes me 7 clicks to get to print a bill of lading, right? How can we reduce that to 3 clicks, right? How can a driver, instead of having to download a new app to his phone to capture that POD, how can he just have a single URL that he goes to on a smartphone, take a picture, and then once again, it's customer agnostic that, hey, I'm putting this up there in a secure authorized means, and anybody, boss, hey, you can have a back office clerk at wherever, sending that to the right person. But my job is done. My job was to capture and post. And then
it's just that you still have this. Sorry, go ahead. No, please, ladies first.
What I'm hearing from Mac a lot of, though, and this is like, as the CEO of a company, I also do this, is just personal introspection as a leader. So I ask myself these questions about my employees. What I'm hearing from Mac is that they're doing that. They're doing personality tests. They're figuring out how the team works together. They're listening to say, hey, their people are saying 7 clicks is too many. It's very collaborative in that I'm sure there's still a hierarchy, it's not like this flat organization, but it's also not just the top pushing down, this is what you must do and this is why it's going to happen. It's collaborative. Companies have to do that. But like you said, Alex, that's a cultural change.
Correct.
Company, like to empower someone is to let them know, not just with words of saying, if you get this wrong or if you speak up and it's not right, that you're not going to be shamed. People aren't going to think less of you. It's actually making sure that that doesn't happen. I remember when COVID first started, I was like reading on LinkedIn that companies were blaming demand planners for like not knowing,
not projecting right.
Bad product. So,
come on, Obama talked about it a year before COVID came, that some epidemic was coming.
No,
right?
but I mean, it's you guys just brought up one very good point, and I think the optimization issue is also that it still happens in silos. Okay, it happens in companies. Okay, Mac is optimizing for NNR for that part of the supply chain. His trucker is optimizing for himself. Okay, the customer is optimizing for himself. Okay, give you some simple examples from back in the days where it was just about booking. Okay, the customer, when he makes a booking manually by email, it means somebody has to write it. Okay, somebody else receives that email, and I'm always talking about this $3 email. Well, to open an email, to read an email, to take an action costs you $3 minimum. Okay, anywhere in the world. So if somebody has to handle that, the guy writes it, the other guy receives it. If you can optimize that and say, okay, it happens by API from his system directly to yours, the customer has an optimization and you have an optimization. Because on the next price discussion, you discuss about $5 a shipment, and you throw away $3 here and $3 on that side on every bloody shipment. Okay, so it has a lot to do with this looking at the end of things. And of course, one issue is we split the tasks a lot. The traditional forwarder some 30 years ago, one guy was doing the whole job. Okay, so he knew what happens in the beginning and what happens in the end. Now you have tasks diluted that every department is optimizing itself, but the end-to-end thinking is a bit disappearing. Some companies do it better, of course, but then you have the issue across companies. Do I talk to my trucker in that way? Like what Mac did now last week with his trucker, many people don't do. Okay, they just say, hey, we need this bloody proof of delivery. Why do you still not provide it? Okay, figure out a way to give it to us. Otherwise, we have to change the trucker. But it doesn't solve the problem.
No, and I will state this right here. A lot of these things are, they sound, in like an impossible task. They're not. They're just improbable if you don't take the appropriate steps with the people and the culture in place. For instance, we'll use this as an example to just put some proof in the pudding to say that this can happen in logistics and supply chain. If I'm moving a piece of paper, that's like logistics and supply chain within my own company. Hands down. Like if I'm thinking about that's the asset itself, document A, and getting it over here to the other side of the office, there's logistics and supply chain. I have to get everybody involved. Rocket Mortgage understood this. They understood that if I want to get a mortgage, there's typically 300 touch points that are occurring from starting that till the person signs it and they can get the keys to their house and go inside and, the bank funds. But they're like, if we can bring everybody together, understand all the points of that process, reduce the friction, capture all that data on the board. I don't care how you want to do it in any sort of Lean Six Sigma approach. And we're there. Now we've captured the data. Now we can speak to the human element and we can work together collaboratively and understand where we can all come together to alter the culture to actually improve the balance of our work here, to make it more efficient, to move document A over to this point. So whether I'm moving a cargo container, right? Whether I'm moving potatoes, whether I'm moving people, or whether I am moving pieces of paper, the process is always going to be the same. And if it can happen with banks, which are some of the most entrenched things in history, slowest with a god-awful amount of red tape, we can do it in logistics and supply chain. And we can really feel the tangible benefits of the fourth industrial revolution and deal with the catalysts that will continue to be an onslaught on the global economy if we can get people together and really empower them, understand the cultures, and be effective in our decision-making and strategy on the data we receive from these systems observing it. Does that make sense?
Get them focused on the customer.
Yeah, of course.
Get them focused on the customer. That works for
Correct.
me.
Yeah.
Focus
I
on-
mean, there's in supply chain there is an example for this. I mean, I'm always taking the same example. You use courier. Okay, you put your damaged iPhone into an envelope and you get a tracking number, and off it goes. And you trust that it arrives, and the process is running relatively smooth. So a container is just a big envelope. Yet we have so many silos on the way that make it very complex. Okay, so the problem is already solved. Okay, so there is a solution for the issue. It's just we don't get it over into the normal supply chain because it's too fragmented. It has too many different players, each of them optimizing their own little silo. Some of them maybe making money up on intransparency. Okay, and not really willing to share any kind of data. Okay, that's another problem we might touch on. And then of course you have all these data points on the way. Okay, the terminal is capturing the temperature of the reefer, but it is not giving that data to anybody else. It just captures it to save its own back. So it's you have these kind of points where everybody optimizes for themselves, and you have to somehow overcome that. And probably we need a data model for that, which is also monetizing in some way. Okay, you share this data with me, it gives me a benefit, so I pay for that. Okay, some micro amount or whatever.
Sounds like the Turtle Marketplace. That sounds fantastic.
Exactly. So
well done.
and that's why
Congratulations.
Here,
Here's the solve.
But that's the problem.
We push
with
it
a lot
over
of
to
the
you, and you
blockchain
have to
credit.
deal with the issue.
Yeah, correct. So go ahead, Mac. Tell us what the issue is.
That's when I hear the new marketplace
Mhm.
related to supply chain and logistics, I turn off. Right? It's unfathomable that once again IBM and Maersk have teamed up to create this trade lens platform. If they can't do it, it's these small blockchain companies that are creating this new frictionless, trusting marketplace that it's a lot of moving pieces. And once again, as Ruben was alluding to, there is that opacity that creates jobs. I mean, some of the providers in the logistics space have jobs because there isn't that frictionless handoff in a digital means, right?
That's correct. Listen,
I had one last point, and that was, I think it comes down to timing, right? Some of us were, a lot of the blockchain solutions and companies in supply chain logistics were too early, right? And they already went bankrupt, unfortunately, and they were blocked by the ability for these pieces and stakeholders throughout the supply chain to say, no, we don't want to share that information, right? Until there is that customer driving and saying, hey, you have to share this information. And then lastly, it's how to share the information. Without standards, we're still going to be in the same place in 2 years, right? Because there's so many options to digitally share information, right? So it's okay. Is it like Ruben was saying, from system to system, right? Be it an API or EDI, which once again, EDI has been around for 40 years. I mean, APIs have been too, if you actually look at the definition of what an application programmable interface is. There's so many different ways to trigger information, right? So it's, hey, how do you want to send me your booking? You can send it via email, you can text me, you can call me, you can send an API, EDI. There's so many different ways that it almost breeds more complexity with all those options until we have a standard to say, hey, we used to send an 856 via EDI. Here's the new API equivalent of that. Here's the data model with the required pieces of information. And that's it. We don't need to talk anymore. Just do that.
No, and you're right. Listen.
Yeah, but I had the crying for standards will not save us. I mean, I had this discussion last week in Bratislava with a very nice panel. There was also a blockchain friend involved, a few digital players. Same issue there. Everybody was saying because we don't have standards, this doesn't happen. Okay, but on the other hand, a lot of people don't want standards because I have my standard and it works well. So why would I share it with other people? So and to bring it even back to the basics, Mac. I mean, Malcolm McLean didn't invent the container. The container was there before. He brought the standard in, okay? And because he brought standards in and he standardized the corner posts, and he was actually opening that kind of standard to other people, the box took off, okay? So it's more than that, huh? So the point is. So, normally how do standards happen? There's either a market leader throwing them out and says, okay, this is it, and this de facto becomes the standard, or some kind of leading organization is pushing it, okay, and there's nobody pushing for it. There's DCSA around now since 3 years, and they have not produced much. The UN CTAT approach is relatively cumbersome. There is a few approaches happening, but we're still not there.
So this is, guys, and I just say that as a general term because I know there's multiple sexes here in the room. Blockchain, yeah. Listen, the fiance even says, she says guys.
I'm okay meeting guys. I don't know if I'm gonna get pushback on that, but
no, you're good.
I say guys to my team, and we're all girls. So
see, that's my point. There we go. I'm saved. All right, hear me out here. Blockchain's a buzzword. All well and good. Like I said before, you can create new technologies, but unless people choose to adopt it, right, it's not going to do anything fantastic. And there are phenomenal machine learning applications for non-standardized, non-defined information.
Yes.
So whether or not the whole industry has 1,000 different types of containers, the systems will naturally standardize on their own. The key is to get people to share their standards. And that's not really going to happen with blockchain itself. That's not the solve. It's the incentivization to say that, will you share with the market your information about what you do? I don't really care how your standards put together. Somebody just has to share it. Because if there is a lack of sharing occurring, we can't go anywhere. If knowledge can't naturally evolve, we will stagnate. And I use our marketplace as an example because, yes, it does involve a type of blockchain technology only to capture a record of the sharing, but that's not the key. The key is that humans come together to share information and they're incentivized to do so. I will pay you some amount of information, some amount of money for some information, and that's the trade. And in doing so, we can ingest that information and analyze it through a body of scientific knowledge applied to computer programming to figure out how we look at this in some sort of global format. It's all, you can say, I need a standard. Well, you don't really need it that much anymore when anything can analyze mass amounts of information very quickly. We just have to open up the silos. And those are human beings coming together, sharing that information. And whether you want to use our marketplace, right, to capture that information from the people internally within your own unit, or you want to use it to capture information from individuals in Japan, China, India, Australia, and the rest of the world, you can do so. But the incentive.
But you put the nail on the head. I mean, the point is really we don't have a data business model in logistics. Okay, so there is no price on data, and I think this kind of thing, if you manage to put a price tag on data, come back to my simple terminal example. Okay, today in a terminal, you normally, if you have high technology, you have a kind of a reefer runner or whatever tag on your energy cable that is more or less plugged in the reefer in order to capture the temperature of your reefer container at the terminal. The terminal stores the data in order to make sure at what temperature the thing came in, at what temperature it was stored, and what temperature it goes out. Okay, the modern reefer container has its own sensors in there. Okay, so if there were a QR code on the reefer where I just scan it in and I say, hey, I want to share this data from that reefer engine while the container is at my terminal, and I don't need to invest in a reefer runner, I don't need somebody to check the temperature, then I already have it, okay, because the data is captured. Right. But today it might be captured 3-4 times by different means, okay, because 3-4 parties have an interest and each of them is doing their own thing. Doesn't add any value.
No.
So we have to somehow have a way of dealing with data. And I agree with your other point that actually automating it with AI is a big point. That's absolutely possible. We can, a bill of lading has 42 data points. If you give me enough data, then a halfway decent machine learning algorithm can recognize which data is what data point. It's not rocket science, right?
No.
So if the standard deviates a bit, it's not that complex.
We've already lost our C-suite having that conversation. I mean, they're
yeah, of course they're
turned off.
They turned off on about 10 minutes in. That's it.
Yeah, I know. And so that's why you have to say, listen, C-suite, we need information. If you want to make a decision, you need information to do so. But the information we need, we have to pay for it. And if we want to get it from people that otherwise aren't going to share it through the silos, you're going to have to incentivize them properly. And the one thing that works globally is cash. People understand, pay me to tell me something, right? And we can do that. And so,
Alex, I got the perfect example.
Go ahead.
Ruben,
You give me that example right now.
Going back to the terminal example. So when Malcolm McLean, I mean, he launched his version of the intermodal container in the 40s and in the 50s, but it didn't take off until the Vietnam War, when he sold the American military organization on using it to send equipment to Vietnam. Now, then they had, okay, the ships are coming back empty with these containers. So Japan first started manufacturing all these high-tech components, and they were filling the container with the goods going back. But then it was China in the early 80s, as it opened up, that they looked at their current terminal infrastructure and they said, hey, can we service these containers? And what do we need to service these containers? We need cranes. We need trucks that we can put it on, right? Yeah. So if we broke down this problem to be that specific, hey, do you have the equipment to handle an information container?
That's what I'm saying.
Yes or no?
Question.
And the motivation, Alex, is look at the GDP increase that China was able to accomplish by investing in container terminal infrastructure. It's in the trillions because they made those strategic investments up front, and they're still doing it today. Correct. So I don't know, Ruben. That seems like a pretty good.
Yeah, of course. It's money that plays. Yeah, absolutely.
It's money that plays. So, ladies and gentlemen, not guys, as we close this up, okay, and we look to the fourth industrial revolution, what would be a final focus that you would leave for the individuals listening to this? What would be your actionable hope for them to start to be like, we need to make a move on this? What is the simplest, most effective thing they can do right now?
I would really like to see people diagram their processes and just have visibility into what people are actually doing and why they're doing it. And then to communicate with each person at a note in the process of why what they're doing is important. Not just, hey, do this because XYZ, or not just do this because someone told you to do it, but this is why it's actually important to what we do as a company to help us remain open, to help us remain profitable. Right. But it's just like we've talked about it. If you don't know what you're actually doing and why you're doing it, the technology isn't going to help. You're not going to get any return on investment from any of the technology. We can talk blockchain, we can talk standards, we can talk cloud-based, whatever. But if the people don't know what they're doing, and if the people can't tell the technology vendors, if the business can't tell the technology vendors what to actually configure and why, then it's all obsolete.
Yeah. Process is more important than tech. And I think getting people to think end to end is the key to everything. They really have to think, hey, where is my space in this kind of chain, and what do I contribute, and what's the end-to-end game for the final customer in the end?
I would say very simple. Spend a fraction of the money that you spend on IT and infrastructure on the people. A fraction, small fraction.
Yeah, and spend the money on people first.
And exactly. Second one also, try to think it from the customer, because that gives you an end-to-end view very naturally. Let's forget about silos.
Yeah,
very good put.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's one, to Dyci's point, Lucidchart is a big, highly used piece of software that we do at our company to process, map, and optimize. For me, it's to the audience. This problem's still not solved, right? We're still living in a world where we need people we need the next Malcolm McLean, the next sea-changing logistics innovation is still out there, and don't go work for a big company where your voice is not going to be heard, but don't do it all yourself, right? Find a company like working for anybody on this call where your voice is going to be heard, where you can process, map, look at current process, show the future optimization, and then make it happen, right? By bringing together culture, technology, people, and all of these things together, because it's certainly ripe for further disruption and further optimization.
Absolutely agree. Listen, for you, thank you very much for joining us here today on TartleCast. This will not fall on deaf ears. I'm excited about this, which is strange because it's logistics and supply chain, but I think it's because we had a strong focus on the human element. Yeah, I knew I'd get a little laugh.
Logistics and supply chain is a people industry.
It's people.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very people-oriented, right?
It's actually pretty cool, yeah.
That's what it boils down to. So let's continue that focus, and I do look forward to speaking with the four of you again in the future. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.